Amanda sat at her kitchen table. A stack of paper sat before her, 5 inches high, held together by a heavy rubber band. Every envelope was a reminder of medical bills and lost income. She pulled the first one from the top, her fingers trembling against the coarse paper. A late notice. The red ink across the header seemed to scream. She set it down and reached for the next, then the next, until the total registered in her mind. $78,000. The kitchen light hummed above her, casting a harsh, flat glow over the table. She stared at the figures, unable to look away. The silence of the apartment pressed in from the walls. She reached for the laptop, her movements stiff, and closed the lid to hide the spreadsheet. Her breath came in shallow, ragged bursts. There was no room to move, no space to think, only the crushing reality of the numbers. She pushed the stack toward the center of the table and stared at the dark wood grain, waiting for a solution that refused to appear. She stood up, but the chair scraped against the floor, a sound that echoed too loudly in the quiet room. She walked to the bedroom, yet the stack of bills followed her, a phantom weight in her mind. Amanda lay flat on her back, staring at the ceiling. The darkness did not offer comfort. Every time she closed her eyes, the red ink from the notices flickered against her eyelids. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, uneven rhythm that refused to slow. She pressed a palm to her chest, feeling a sharp, tightening pressure, as if a heavy stone rested right over her lungs. She rolled to her side, then to the other, dragging the blankets with her until they tangled around her legs. The air in the room felt thin. She sat up, clutching her throat, gasping for a breath that never felt deep enough. Hours dragged by in the dark. She watched the shadows shift across the wall, counting the minutes until dawn, trapped in a cycle of worry that kept her body rigid and her mind racing toward a dead end. The next afternoon, the laptop screen glowed with the stark white light of a pending video call. Amanda sat before the webcam, her shoulders hunched. While waiting for the host to join, the silence of the room felt heavy, almost suffocating. She reached for her phone to drown out the noise in her head and tapped the play button on an audiobook. The narrator's voice filled the small space, crisp and steady. Any task seems impossible when viewed as a whole. The words hung in the air, cutting through her cycle of panic. She froze. The host's face appeared on screen, but she barely registered the greeting. She reached out and hit pause. The sudden silence was different now, not empty, but expectant. She pulled a blank notebook from under a pile of papers and gripped a pen. Her fingers were no longer shaking, they were steady. She looked at the white page, then back at the screen of bills she had avoided for weeks. She tore a fresh sheet from the pad and placed it flat on the desk. She was done staring at the mountain. She started to break it down. She ignored the $78,000 total. It was a monolith she could not move, so she looked for the smallest fracture in the wall. Her eyes scanned the list of creditors until they landed on a medical balance of $150. It was small. It was reachable. She opened her banking portal, the blue light of the screen reflecting in her pupils. Her mouse hovered over the transfer button. She input the digits, double-checked the account number, and paused. For a second, the cursor blinked in rhythm with her pulse. She clicked. The progress bar swirled, a tiny circle of motion that seemed to take an hour to finish. Then the page refreshed. A green check mark appeared next to the account name. The screen displayed a balance of $0. Amanda let out a breath she had been holding for months, her shoulders dropping inches away from her ears. The air in the room felt lighter. She looked at the screen again, confirming the 0, and leaned back in her chair. One down. The mountain had not moved, but for the first time, she had found a way to chip away at the stone. The momentum from that first 0 propelled her forward. She did not wait for the next month to begin. She opened a new document, drafted 5 emails to potential clients, and offered administrative support at a competitive rate. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with a new, rapid cadence. By the end of the second day, 2 responses arrived in her inbox. She accepted both, adding a weekend social media scheduling task to her growing list of responsibilities. Her schedule tightened, turning into a grid of color-coded blocks. Every morning began with a check of the remaining debt. Every evening ended with a tally of her hours. When the first extra $200 hit her account, she did not hesitate. She bypassed the grocery store. She bypassed the local shops. She logged directly into her banking portal, navigated to the credit account, and hit submit. The balance dropped. The progress bar moved. She repeated this cycle, treating every dollar as a weapon against the debt. She was no longer just waiting for the next deadline. She was hunting for the next task. The work was constant, but the direction was clear. Every hour logged was a layer of safety built against the past. Seasons shifted outside her window, but the view from her chair remained static. Her phone vibrated on the desk, a group message from friends organizing a dinner. Amanda glanced at the screen, saw the notification, and turned it face down. She typed a quick reply, citing a deadline, and returned her focus to the monitor. The room grew dim as the sun set, yet she did not reach for the light switch. Her keyboard clacked in the quiet, a steady, rhythmic sound that filled the void left by her absence from the world. She sat for 12 hours at a stretch. Her posture stiffened, her eyes burned, but she did not break the rhythm. She watched the debt tracker on her second monitor. It was a digital map of her progress, and every hour of work was a step closer to the finish line. She did not look at the clock to see how late it was. She looked to see how many hours of labor remained before she could justify sleep. The friends stopped calling after the third rejection. She did not notice. She was already opening the next file, her fingers positioned, ready for the next task to begin. The rhythm of her life narrowed to a single, repetitive loop. Work, track, pay. The results arrived in staggered bursts. One Tuesday, she cleared the small balance on her third credit line. The screen flashed the 0. She did not pause to celebrate. She clicked to the next tab, checked the balance of her fourth account, and sent the payment. 3 days later, that one hit 0 as well. The progress was no longer a slow crawl. It was a cascade. She tracked the numbers with a frenetic intensity, her eyes darting across the spreadsheet as if trying to force the figures to shrink faster. Every time an account closed, she felt the physical pressure in her chest loosen, only to be replaced by a sharper, more urgent need to finish the next. Her desk became a command center of blinking cursors and payment confirmation windows. The mountain of debt that once seemed insurmountable was now a series of small, manageable hills. She pushed harder. She took on more complex projects, sacrificing sleep to ensure the payments cleared before the weekend. The goal was no longer a distant possibility. It was a visible line on the horizon. She could see the end of the tunnel, and she ran toward it without looking back. The chair creaked under her weight, the same sound it had made for 2 years. Amanda sat still. The desk was clear of everything except the laptop. She opened the final credit account portal. The balance stared back at her, a single finite number that represented the last of the debt. Her hands rested on the desk. They were not shaking. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the keys, and took a breath that filled her lungs completely. The air in the room felt different, thinner, as if the oxygen had been waiting for this moment. She typed the amount. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a rhythmic, heavy thud that sounded louder than the hum of the cooling fan. She moved the cursor to the payment button. The screen glowed, reflecting in her eyes. She did not click immediately. She held her hand steady, feeling the pulse in her fingertips, and looked at the blinking cursor. This was the end of the math. This was the end of the survival cycle. She shifted her weight, pressed the button, and held her breath as the page began to refresh. The page loaded in a blur of white. Then, the text appeared in bold black letters. Account closed. Amanda stared at the screen, her eyes tracing the words twice. She exhaled, a long, ragged sound that seemed to pull the very air from the room. The tightness in her chest, a weight she had carried for 2 years, simply vanished. Her shoulders dropped. The pulse in her fingertips slowed to a steady, rhythmic beat. She leaned back, the chair frame groaning as she shifted her weight. She did not move to close the laptop. She did not reach for her phone. She simply sat. The silence in the apartment was absolute, no longer heavy with the dread of upcoming bills or the pressure of looming deadlines. It was a clean, hollow silence. She looked at her hands, resting flat on the table, and realized they were perfectly still. She scanned the room, noticing the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic outside. Every detail felt sharp and real. She had reached the absolute 0. She was no longer running. She was finally, completely, standing still. The stillness lasted until the screen darkened. Amanda tapped the trackpad, waking the laptop to a different view. She navigated to her savings account, where the balance now climbed with every refresh. She did not hesitate. She opened the investment portal, entered the figures, and watched the numbers transfer into a fund. The act was mechanical, yet it felt like building a foundation. Survival had been a game of inches, but growth required a wider lens. She closed the browser, stood up, and walked to the window. The city lights were coming on, one by one. She looked back at the desk, now just a workspace rather than a fortress. The lesson was clear. No miracle had arrived. No luck had intervened. She had not climbed the mountain by staring at the peak. She had reached it by ignoring the distance and focusing entirely on the ground beneath her feet. She took a final look at the screen, turned away from the desk, and walked into the rest of her life. The summit was behind her, but the path forward was entirely her own to build.